Los Angeles, late 1938, past midnight. The Brown Derby is quieter than it should be for this hour, not because it's empty, but because the wrong people are listening. Cigarette smoke hangs low beneath the lights, trapped and unmoving, as if the room itself doesn't want to breathe too loudly. In a private booth pushed slightly too far into the corner, glasses sweat onto linen. Ice melts slowly. No one reaches for it. A young screenwriter is finishing a story. He's leaning forward just enough to be noticed. Jacket loosened, tie pulled down half an inch, the posture of someone who wants to belong but doesn't yet understand the cost of saying the wrong thing in the wrong company. He smiles before the punchline lands. "It's funny," he says lightly, lowering his voice like he's letting the table in on a secret. "How at MGM your career doesn't move forward or backward, it just gets filed." There's a beat. Then a few laughs, not real laughter, the polite kind. The kind people use to show they're not offended, not implicated, not involved. Someone exhales through their nose, another nods as if approving the cleverness without approving the speaker. For half a second it works. The writer relaxes just slightly. And then everything stops. At the end of the booth, Eddie Mannix doesn't laugh. He doesn't react at all. He's been smiling all evening, soft, friendly, practiced. The kind of smile that makes people feel safe without knowing why. Now it fades, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with precision, as if someone has turned down a dimmer switch. Mannix reaches into his pocket. Slowly. He takes out a cigarette and taps it once against the table. The sound is small, but in the silence it lands hard. Someone across from the writer shifts in their seat. Another person looks down at their drink, suddenly interested in the melting ice. Mannix lights the cigarette. The flame briefly illuminates his face, calm, unreadable, almost bored. He inhales, holds it, and looks directly at the young man who just made the joke. Not with anger. With assessment. The look lasts a little too long. It's not the stare of someone deciding whether to argue or forgive. It's the look of someone deciding whether you exist at all after this moment. No one speaks. The pause stretches. 5 seconds, maybe more, long enough for the writer to feel the heat crawl up the back of his neck, long enough for him to realize he should say something, but also long enough to understand that anything else he says now will only make it worse. Mannix finally exhales smoke toward the ceiling. "That's funny," he says, his voice is low, even almost kind. But his eyes never leave the writer's face. A columnist clears his throat, someone gestures for another drink. A conversation starts up again, unevenly, forced. The moment appears to pass. But it hasn't passed. It's lodged in the room, unspoken, unresolved. And everyone there knows it. Because Eddie Mannix doesn't argue, he doesn't threaten, he doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't need to. He fixes things. Quietly. Efficiently. And most of the time, by the moment you realize something has gone wrong, it's already too late to correct it. The writer laughs again, weaker this time, trying to show he didn't mean anything by it. Someone next to him pats his arm, reassuringly. Another tells a story louder than necessary, pushing the conversation forward as if speed alone can bury what just happened. But Mannix has already leaned back. Already disengaged. Already decided something. The rest of the night continues on the surface. Conversations overlap. Plates are cleared, new faces drift in and out of the booth, but the tone has changed. The warmth is gone, replaced by something cooler and more careful. No one addresses the joke again. No one references Louis B. Mayer. And no one looks at the writer the same way. He doesn't notice it at first. Why would he? By the time the group breaks up, he's almost convinced himself he imagined the tension. He shakes hands, says goodnight, steps out into the Los Angeles air, neon reflecting off wet pavement, heart still light enough to ignore the quiet unease following him down the sidewalk. It isn't until the next morning that the silence becomes real. It starts with a call that doesn't come. Then another. Then a meeting that's suddenly been pushed. He tells himself it's nothing, studios are busy, schedules change, people forget. By afternoon, the pattern is impossible to ignore. His agent leaves a message that sounds too casual, too rehearsed. "Just sit tight," the voice says, "things are complicated right now." Complicated. That word hasn't been used before. By evening the phones stop ringing altogether. And somewhere, in some office the writer will never be invited into, a name has been softly moved from one stack to another. Not blacklisted. Not fired. Just paused. Filed. Exactly as joked. What happened at that booth doesn't appear in any police report. No threats were made. No words were exchanged beyond a cigarette-lit pause and a single sentence spoken in an even tone. But everyone there understood what that pause meant. Because in old Hollywood, power didn't need to shout. It just needed to stop smiling. And once it did, things had a way of disappearing. Meetings, invitations, momentum. People. The first sign that something is wrong doesn't arrive dramatically. It arrives politely. 2 days after the Brown Derby dinner, the screenwriter's agent finally calls back. The voice on the other end is lighter than the words being spoken. Too light, professional, careful. Couple of conversations got rescheduled, the agent says. Nothing to panic about. The word panic lands like a suggestion. The writer sits on the edge of his bed in a small apartment near Franklin Avenue, the morning light filtering through half-open blinds. He's still wearing yesterday's shirt. He hasn't gone into the studio because no one told him to come in. That's unusual. He asks which conversations. There's a pause. Just general stuff, the agent says. Development meetings, reads, you know how it is. But the writer doesn't know how it is, not like this. By noon, he tries calling a producer he's had lunch with twice a week for the past 6 months. The call doesn't go through. The secretary says he's out. She doesn't offer to take a message. Another producer answers but sounds distracted, unavailable, busy in a way that feels rehearsed. Let's touch base later, the man says, already hanging up. Later never comes. By the end of the week, a quiet pattern has formed. Doors don't slam, they simply don't open. Hollywood in the late 1930s runs on motion. Momentum is everything. Meetings beget meetings, lunches turn into rewrites, rewrites turn into picture assignments. The system doesn't punish you loudly, it rewards you until it doesn't. And when the rewards stop, there is no announcement. No memo. Just absence. The writer begins showing up in places he used to be invited to, studio commissaries, hallway benches outside office suites. He waits longer than usual, smiles harder, lowers his voice when he speaks. People are still polite. That's the most unsettling part. They call him kid, they clap him on the shoulder, they say we'll circle back. But they don't look at him for very long anymore. And no one, not once, asks him what he's working on. A week later, he runs into a columnist he recognizes from the Brown Derby booth. The man freezes for half a second when he sees him. Then recovers. Hey, the columnist says, how's everything? The writer hesitates, he wants to ask, he wants to say something sharp, something honest. Instead he says, good, busy. The columnist nods too quickly. Good, good, he replies, and then, without explanation, excuses himself and walks away. The writer stands alone by the bar, watching the man disappear into another conversation like he was never there. That's when the realization begins to creep in. Slowly. Uncomfortably. No one has warned him, no one has told him he crossed a line, no one has called to explain what went wrong. But everyone seems to know something he doesn't. Or rather, something he's not supposed to acknowledge. He replays the night at the Brown Derby in his head, the tone of his own voice, the rhythm of the joke, the way the laughter sounded too quick. Then he remembers the silence. The cigarette. The look. And Eddie Mannix doing the one thing that mattered more than any threat. Stopping. Mannix's power in Hollywood doesn't come from a title card. He isn't the face of the studio, he doesn't give speeches, he doesn't court the press, his name appears in credits rarely if at all. But if you work in this town long enough, you learn a simple rule. If Eddie Mannix is in the room, then the studio already knows why you're there. He handles problems that aren't supposed to exist. Scandals before they break, affairs before they surface, disputes before they become disputes. And people before they become inconvenient. Always quietly. Always indirectly. Always deniable. So when he stopped smiling at that booth, it wasn't anger. It was arithmetic. The writer's agent calls again. This time the voice is different. Lower. Measured. I think it'd be smart if you lie low for a bit, he says. Why, the writer asks. There's a long pause. You didn't do anything wrong, the agent finally says, but maybe you said something out of rhythm. Out of rhythm. Like a wrong note in a song no one explains to you until the music stops. The writer presses for more, the agent doesn't give it. Let me handle it, he says, these things pass. But the writer can feel that it hasn't passed. It's settled. Weeks go by. Scripts come back unread. A project he was attached to suddenly changes direction. Another one is quietly reassigned. He hears his name spoken less and less in rooms he's not in. Not aggressively. Just less. Like someone adjusting a volume knob one notch at a time. And the most frightening part is that there is no confrontation to fight. Nothing to argue against. Nothing to appeal. Hollywood doesn't exile you by telling you to leave. It just stops noticing you're there. One afternoon, he runs into a junior executive he knows well enough to risk honesty. What's going on? The writer asks quietly. Did I miss something? The executive looks at him for a long moment. Then glances around the hallway. Then leans in not to whisper, but to lower his voice just enough that no one else feels included. You should be more careful about where you're funny, he says. That's it. No explanation. No follow-up. He walks away immediately. The writer goes home and pours a drink. Then another. He thinks about the joke again, not its content but its timing, who was at the table, who wasn't laughing, who had the power to remember a single sentence longer than anyone else. He understands now that he didn't insult a man. He exposed a truth too lightly. And in a system built on control, even truth must follow rules. Especially when spoken casually. Especially in front of the wrong fixer. By the end of the month, his career hasn't ended. That's the cruelty of it. It's suspended. Floating. Undefined. He can't prove anything is wrong, which means he can't explain it to anyone outside the town. His family back east still thinks he's doing well, friends still ask what's next. He doesn't know what to tell them. Because nothing has happened. And everything has. Somewhere, Eddie Mannix is still smiling at other tables. And somewhere else a file remains closed, not marked, not destroyed, just never reopened. The writer begins to understand that the silence isn't a phase. It's the message. And the only question left is how long that silence is meant to last. The moment it finally settles isn't dramatic. There's no final rejection letter. No phone call delivering bad news. Just a morning where the writer wakes up and understands, without evidence, without confirmation, that nothing is coming back. Not today. Not next week. Not ever in the same way. He sits at his desk with a clean sheet of paper in the typewriter and realizes something unsettling. For the first time since he came west, he doesn't know who he's writing for. Hollywood doesn't collapse around him. That's what makes it unbearable. The studios keep running, pictures get made, new faces arrive with brighter smiles and better timing. At the Brown Derby, the same booth fills night after night with laughter and smoke and decisions made quietly over drinks. Eddie Mannix is still there sometimes, still calm, still smiling. The system hasn't faltered. It's simply adjusted. The writer keeps working at first. He has to. Writing is the only thing that still feels solid. Scripts stack up in drawers, treatments get mailed out, ideas get pitched to people who nod, thank him, and never follow up. He hears phrases more often now. Not right for us. Too smart for the market. Let's revisit this later. Later becomes a ghost word. Months pass. He takes smaller jobs, quiet ones, uncredited rewrites, punch-ups that don't earn screen credit or momentum, studio work arranged through intermediaries who never invite him inside. He is useful, but no longer visible, which is sometimes worse than being shut out entirely. Because visibility is how Hollywood measures worth. And he's been measured. One night, almost a year after the joke, he runs into someone who knew him before. A playwright passing through town, an outsider, someone not fluent in the unspoken rules yet. They have a drink, catch up. You were supposed to break big, the playwright says casually, People back east still talk about you. The writer smiles. They still do, he lies. The playwright leans in curious, so what happened? The writer opens his mouth and closes it. Because there is no version of the story that sounds sane to someone who doesn't understand Hollywood's physics. No single villain, no confrontation, no proof. Just a sentence spoken in the wrong room. In a smile that stopped. So he shrugs instead. Timing, he says. Which is the safest answer in town? Years later, much later, the joke barely feels like his anymore. It's been sanded down by repetition in his mind, stripped of humor, reduced to a moment of misjudgment that cost more than it should have. By then, the system has moved on completely. The golden age shines brighter, faces change, power consolidates, studios grow more controlled, more disciplined, more careful about what is said aloud. People don't joke as freely anymore. Not in mixed company. Especially not near fixers. Eddie Mannix dies in 1963. The obituaries are respectful, controlled. They talk about loyalty, service, and discretion, about a man who protected the studio. The writer reads one of those notices years later in a faded newspaper and feels something tighten, not anger, not even resentment. Recognition. Because now he understands the full scale of what that pause meant. Not just for him. For everyone watching. That booth at the Brown Derby wasn't just a meal. It was a demonstration. A quiet lesson delivered without spectacle. A reminder that power didn't need to punish loudly to be effective. It only needed to be seen once. By the end of his career, the writer's name still appears in credits occasionally. Smaller films, television, work that keeps him employed but never central. People who study old scripts can see the talent. What they can't see is the gap. The absence. The alternate path that vanished without explanation. And that's the part that lingers. Not the joke. Not even the consequence. But how easily it all happened. No threats. No confrontation. No raised voices. Just one sentence. One silence. One man deciding not to smile anymore. And an entire career slowly folding inward, file by file, until even the people it happened to stop trying to explain it. Because in old Hollywood, fear didn't arrive screaming. It arrived politely. Sat down at the table. Lit a cigarette. And waited for you to understand. Without being told. That some things were never meant to be said out loud. Not twice. Not ever.